Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Jesse, and this channel is called How to Drum and Bass. And here it is my mission to take what the top producers are doing right now, break it down, and to teach it to you so that you can improve your drum and bass production. And today we're gonna answer two very important questions. The first one is, should I have ironed this shirt before going on camera? And the second one is, how do you make rave stabs like Dimension? The first question is obviously yes, but I didn't. What you gonna do about it? But the second question is much more important. In the genre of drum bass, the sounds from the 80s and from the 90s have been really popular for a while now. For example, a lot of the really plucky basses in, for example, Dimension songs or some of the other dance floor producers are very akin to the kind of stuff that got done in the 80s. But recently, there's also a lot more sort of the 90s rave sound present in a lot of popular tunes. And basically, it almost sounds like they're sampling the stuff that they used to sample back in the 80s. Stuff from the M1, the Korg, resampled parts from choirs like T99 used to do. And not gonna lie, it sounds awesome. It worked back then, and it definitely works now. And we're hearing Dimension use a bit of this in his latest couple of tracks, which are doing really, really well. For example, in DJ Turn It Up, but also in Rhyme Dust. And today, I wanna have a look at how do you create something like that, because you can't really use Serum. It's not as straightforward as you think. A lot of those sounds from the 80s and from the 90s were sampled from other records. What that means is they're not made from a synthesizer just like that, but they are sampled from either people singing, a choir, a real piano or organ, or someone's synthesizer, but then the samples are chopped and put through all kinds of vinyl distortion and whatever. So that is not really that achievable with just a digital synthesizer. But luckily, there are ways to do it, and we're gonna dive into that today. Now, what I'll do is I'll leave the project file, the Ableton project file down here, so that if you want, you can have a look at the whole thing in its entirety. But as always, I encourage you to just follow along, because that's the way that you learn the most. All right, let's dive in. All right, so what we're gonna get as close to as possible today of recreating is the Rave Stab from Dimension's DJ Turn It Up. And I used lalal.ai to isolate pretty much just that part, and it sounds like this. And what we're going to recreate is going to end up sounding like this. I'd say that that's about 80 to 90% the same, but the good thing is you can change a lot of things about this patch. So let's see how we got to achieve that. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of layers in here. I must confess, maybe I went a little bit overboard because I wanted to get as close as possible to the sound. It's a lot easier if you just need a rave sound. But I thought it would be good to take you with me on this sort of journey, layering all these sounds together to get to a certain kind of end result. So what we're going to start with is the magic really here is in Rave Generator 2. Now, there's a guy called Wavosar, I think, on the internet, who basically took all of the samples from like the 80s and the 90s and that kind of stuff, and he put it into what is essentially a sampler plugin. And there is loads of them. Yeah, there's probably maybe 100 different things, and there's these sort of stab samples of all different kinds of timbres, but there's also actual synths in there too. And as you can see, I've got a whole bunch of them loaded up here. But if you were just to create a channel and put Rave Generator on it. Oh, and by the way, if you're trying to install Rave Generator, it's kind of old, and I had some trouble first as well. I run a MacBook. I think maybe it's easier on Windows, but if you're on a Mac, you can Google around because you have to do a specific command in the terminal to make it work. I'll put a link to that in the description so you can check it out. You do that, and then it should work fine. So yeah, we can take any of these and just mess around with some of the notes. For example, this standard one. It's already very familiar. That sounds like one of Headache's songs, right? Move Your Body, I think. And there's loads of other ones. You can just choose another one like this one. That already sounds a lot like what we're looking for. And you can even layer them. You can put them together. And there is an absolute ton of them in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to find sort of the base of that sound. And as you can sound, it's very crunchy. It's very distorted. That's because all of these samples were recorded in hardware that's literally like 30 to 40 years old. So that hardware wasn't perfect, but that gives it a lot of character. Then we're going to make sort of the sample body, but that's going to sound kind of empty. What we're going to do then is we're also going to add a little bit of extra top end to that, because as you will notice as you scroll through all these presets, not a lot of them work at very high octaves. So we're going to work on adding a little bit of extra top end tonality. Then we're going to put a more centered signal behind it that we do actually make in Serum that's going to make it sound a lot more full. And then in the end, what we're going to do is when we look at the specific one in DJ Turn It Up, it sort of gets followed by an echo of a synth that appears to be something like a hypersaw. So we're going to create layers, and the goal of all those layers is to make it sound like the sound from the 80s, but then fuller and warmer and maybe a little bit richer. All right, so, and I'm just going to turn everything off. Everything that's on the group, I'm going to turn all of these layers off so that we just stay here with one layer. And we're going to turn all of the effects on here off as well, so that we just have one channel with this Rave Generator. And what I've done is I've taken these two, James Brown and Is Dead. And the notes that we're playing, by the way, are these notes. But I did add a chord here so that it plays the upper octave and the octave above that as well. And I found these ones because I just went through all of these and I just played the notes basically to see whether it fit. And these two together sounded really good. So one of them sounds like this. And the other one kind of, well, it sounds like this. It seems to complement that a bit. So I'm layering both of them. That already sounds pretty good, but that is not as nice as we want it just yet. So I wanted to add an OTT to that to add a little bit more top end because we want to get that sort of energy in there. So we put an OTT on there and just pulled up the bands of the highs and the mids a little bit. See, that already sounds nicer. And then I wanted to add even more sort of fuzz on the top end, so I added an erosion, which essentially adds noise to the frequency that you choose, which I chose to be around sort of 9K, which is where that top energy of this sound kind of lies. And then, I wanted to accentuate all of that with a high shelf, so that all of that sounds, instead of like this, sounds like this. So a lot more distorted on the top end, but we're going to need that later. So that's one part of the sound, but it sounds a bit thin. It needs a little bit more tonality, and it needs a little bit more sort of a basis to ride off of, I feel. So first, let's add some more top tonality. And essentially, this was just an experiment, but this is also what makes it kind of fun. What I did here is I just went through all of these samples, which is actually really fun to do. And I chose all the ones that had like a plingy belly kind of thing toward the top, because the original patch that we just made only has screeching at the top, only hiss, right? We created more hiss, but also had a lot of hiss. We want a little bit more bling, bling, blong, whatever, actual real shit. So I went through all of these, and I picked, I picked 10 of them or something like that. And I just stacked all of them together. And you would think that sounds really, really crazy, but it actually doesn't really sound that crazy. It sounds pretty neat. So that's almost like a super distorted kind of bling bling, but it layers really nicely. And then what we want to do is we want to take that OTT again and filter it out to, somewhere around 1K, maybe a little bit below, maybe a little bit above that, so that we have this layer. And do note that we are using the same notes here, but I used two pitches to just basically put it up 24 semitones. So now together it sounds like this, rather than. So that's already a lot more alive, but still it sounds a little bit thin in a way, and that's because it doesn't really have any body. It's just, distorted samples from a sample machine. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to add basically just some super saws in it. So I got a Serum patch here, and again I added the same notes, but then minus 24 semitones, and I added a chord here just to play more octaves of this sound. And the patch itself is really simple. It's just two saw waves and a sub oscillating at different octaves from each other, so -1, 0, and +1, and then with a lot of unison on them and a plucky envelope kind of. And then I also put a small low filter on it just to get some of that top end away, because we already have a lot of that. You could even do more filtering here. And the only effects that are on there is hyper to make it even broader, right? Because we want to fill up the feel of the sound, and some distortion. And that's going to be like a plucky, detuned, wide saw sound that sounds like this. And you could already use it like that. It would sound like this altogether. For the specific purpose of recreating Dimensions lead, I felt that it needed a little bit more crunch. So what I did is I added this metallic preset from the amp in Ableton to it. And I think it sounds a lot better like that. It kind of screws up the sound a little bit, just makes it very distorted again. So now we're already getting pretty close. Already very cool. But what I did here in that original sound is that I don't know how to do it, but something comes, something comes after it. And I think maybe it's a kind of reverb. That's because the reverb is basically just an echo that comes after it. I wasn't able to find it. It could be some technique, but we can emulate that by just actually getting another Serum layer and just having the main stab be followed by what is essentially like a hyper saw. So yeah, again, the same with the chords and the pitches here. And then we took a Serum, and I just took this this Serum preset called Hypersaw, really. And the only thing that I did is I added some attack here, and I disabled the reverb because we're going to add reverb on the group. And then, yeah, we just do a little bit of a band pass. So we take out those lows, we take out some of those highs so that it just sort of sits under the sound. And by itself, that sounds like this. And the reason that we put this envelope here is because we want it to sort of only hit after that initial transient of the Rave Stab, right? So together, that makes the sound a little bit less short and a lot more filled up, because now it's going to be sort of followed by a more bodied tail as well. So that makes for this. All right, and then the last thing is I feel like this stab needs a little bit more attack, and maybe it can just use, I thought it could just use a crash. Often you'll see that crashes are layered with a lot of stab hits or synth hits or whatever. So I also just added a crash. Very simple, just on a sampler, EQ'd to only keep the highs and just every note, but then on C3, which, by the way, if you didn't know, if you use a sampler, the original pitch of the sample is on note C3. Very simple. So then we have all of these, and we've got them in a group. And the beautiful thing about putting everything in a group is that whenever the sounds come together, you can then apply some additional processing on it to really sculpt sort of the tonality that you want. So there's a couple of things that we've done here. We turn on this group. I used a transient master here. I'm going to be honest, I don't really think it does anything, but you can hear in Dimension's song that it really slaps on the beat. So I just wanted to see if we could do a little bit more about that. And then another thing I did is I added 2 extra boosts of EQ just by hearing sort of what the original sound was. And that's what you'll often find yourself doing, is you'll have 80% of what you need, and you'll just EQ, and you just kind of pull one of these around while you're listening to the sound until you either get what you like or you realize you might need to add another layer or something like that. So I ended up adding some at about 350 hertz and really giving these highs a boost around 4K, but I did roll off some of these sort of harsher highs because this sound is quite harsh, and otherwise it's going to be too much. Then I played around with a saturator and an overdrive for a bit, which yields also some very cool results. Wasn't what I was looking for today, but definitely the overdrive can add a whole new timbre here. And then another thing that I did want to do is collapse the whole sound to mono, because in my ears that sounded better. You don't have to, and you could actually go and add a mid-side EQ later to sort of only take out the mono first and then add some sides later. For me, this just sounded a lot better. Then 2 things that really sort of glue together the sound, or at least make it feel fuller, is to add a low shelf here and to apply a reverb with a small size, a short decay, and some filtering on the lows and the highs, and some reflecting and some diffusing here as well at a dry wet of 55. So all of that makes the finished sound like this. Yeah, so that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did learn something today, let me know in the comments what you thought was the most interesting thing. Also, let me know what else you want to see, because I'm looking for video ideas. So, and you need to help me out, because I want to make what you want to see. So that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button.